Hello and very warm welcome to each one of you. This is the ninth video of the series and we are going to discuss the last topic of paper 2, that is developmental biology or embryology. This is one of the important areas of paper 2. Questions from this area have been asked in section B of paper 2. Having said that, I would agree that it is not as big or as significant from examination point of view as an area as you would normally be seeing in case of physiology or biochemistry. But having said that, question number 5, which is the compulsory question to be answered in civil service and IFS main, question number 5 does include question from developmental biology. So no one can skip the coverage of developmental biology. Apart from that, developmental biology also gives you a sizable number of questions in paper 2 section B. So the key to do well in section B of paper 2 is to have a very robust command over physiology and biochemistry and a decent command over developmental biology. Since developmental biology is not my major area of teaching in zoology syllabus, so the topic analysis is not being done by me, it is being done by the same faculty member from Delhi University who had discussed the physiology syllabus with you in the last video, and she is going to take up the developmental biology analysis. The discussion is going to start with a quick overview of the syllabus, then the relative weightage given to the individual topics of the syllabus in the actual examination during the last 10 years. Then she would go on to discuss each and every topic, the subtopics, and the main facets that you should be focusing upon during the preparation. And like all other videos of this series, the video will be ending with a suggestion on what you should be reading. And both Indian and international textbook, what the Indian textbook is good for, and where you should be relying upon international textbook. So here we go with the discussion on topics and question areas on developmental biology. I'm sure, like all other videos of this series, you would find this discussion enriching to your preparation, and you would find this entire suggestion meaningful to your ongoing preparation of zoology. So here we go.
So now let us begin with the discussion of developmental biology section of paper 2. So this is the overall syllabus from this section, and as discussed earlier, the end part of the physiology is actually linking the developmental biology section. So physiology of reproduction links the development start of the developmental biology. So gametogenesis, spermatogenesis and oogenesis both is actually something you study in physiology of reproduction, and I think I would suggest that you complete that part while you are preparing for your physiology section and in the physiology of reproduction. So you should begin the dev bio part from fertilization onwards. So initial part would be about the spermatogenesis, oogenesis, and then fertilization. And after fertilization, what is the fate of that zygote? So what happens to that zygote until it develops into a fetus? That is something you cover here in the developmental biology portion. So morphogens, the substances which actually play a role in deciding the axis patterning and determination of the different individual cells, what they will be making in future. Then we proceed to the establishment of axis and then formation of germ layers. So there is this cleavage that happens, and then eventually it leads to gastrulation, which eventually forms the 3 germ layers. So fate maps is an important part, and you have to understand gastrulation with respect to mainly frog and chick. So that is what the syllabus is. Then there are homeotic genes, we'll come to that in detail, and development of 2 of the organs, eye and heart. Placentine mammals is also an important section, and then we move on to the next part, which will include cell lineage, interactions, and very important topic, that is teratogenesis. Then metamorphosis in amphibians and the thyroxine hormone's role in it. Pedogenesis and neoteny is also linked to that. So cell death and aging, developmental genes in man as well as the developmental genes in the chick are also a portion in your syllabus. And then further, IVF technique, embryo transfer and cloning techniques, stem cells, and lastly the biogenetic law. So if you look at the previous year questions, you will find that majority of the questions are from sections such as morphogenesis, axis patterning, gametogenesis, both spermatogenesis and oogenesis, fertilization and the capacitation in vitro and in vivo, gastrulation and pedomorphosis, neoteny, and role of thyroxine hormone in the amphibian metamorphosis. So largely these are the sections. Placenta and teratogenesis is also a very important part. And then few questions from different parts have been asked over the years, such as homeotic genes has been asked, development of eye and heart has been asked, cell death and aging, IVF, stem cells, and biogenetic law also has been asked. So now let us begin how you should approach all these individual sections and what to focus on in those sections of the development biology syllabus. So let us begin with the first topic, that is gametogenesis. And under gametogenesis, spermatogenesis and oogenesis is something which links the physiology section and the developmental biology. So in physiology of reproduction, you should be covering both these topics in detail, and while you are doing that, you should focus with respect to how the questions are asked. And here, because we have already discussed this in detail in physiology, I'll be starting the discussion from fertilization onwards. So in this section, you should be focusing on all the events which lead up to fusion of egg and sperm cell membranes. And here the important topic is capacitation of sperms, both in vitro as well as in vivo. Sperm has to undergo many physiological changes which lead up to its functional maturation, and when it happens in the female's reproductive tract, that is in vivo, or if it is done in the lab during the IVF procedure, that is the in vitro capacitation. So what do you need to focus in capacitation part is that in case of the in vivo capacitation, there is the albumin protein which is there in the female reproductive tract. This albumin protein causes the removal of cholesterol from the sperm cell membrane. So cholesterol removal happens, and this eventually causes the intracellular uptake of calcium and bicarbonate. So increase in the calcium and bicarbonate levels happen, and then that causes the increase in the CAMP, cyclic AMP, and that eventually activates a cascade by activating the protein kinase A, which eventually causes the tyrosine phosphorylation. So increased tyrosine phosphorylation happens. And this eventually all this process is also causing the potassium ions to leave the sperm, and all of this eventually causes the hyperpolarization of the sperm cell membrane, and this increases the activity of the sperm, so it becomes hyperactive. And along with the presence of a hyaluronidase enzyme, it helps in the movement of the sperm, and that is nothing but the capacitation of sperms. And this is very important because if this doesn't happen, the recognition of sperm with zona pellucida will not be happening. So this is capacitation is a very important part. And in vitro, because all these conditions need to be created, whatever is happening in vivo, so serum albumin and calcium and these bicarbonate ions need to be added in the media where the sperm and ova are put, so that the hyperactivity of the sperm happens, and eventually it is able to interact with the ovum cell membrane for the fertilization to occur. Then in fertilization, you need to do the involvement of the zona pellucida glycoproteins, ZP1, 2 and 3, and on the sperm there is the galactosyl transferase GALT, and there is a surface protein called as the SED1. And further, how all these are involved in calcium mediated exocytosis of acrosome vesicle, and then you come to the acrosome reaction and then penetration. So this is also a very important topic. Then the other important topic under fertilization is blocks of polyspermy, because only one sperm is able to fertilize ovum. So how these blocks of polyspermy happen, this is also another topic you should be focusing on this part under fertilization. So once the fertilization has taken place, the zygote is going to start dividing and it will undergo cleavage. And with that, you have the next topics, that is blastulation and gastrulation. And under these two topics only, you will be having the further two, morphogenesis and axis formation. So your syllabus might not be mentioning these individual parts of the syllabus in a sequence, but you need to go into this in this sequence only, so that you have a better understanding of the concepts, and thus you're able to form a nice answer. So what happens is, within a few hours of fertilization, the fertilized egg will undergo series of rapid divisions, and these rapid divisions will only be that the cell number will increase, but there won't be any addition in volume. And this phase is something you know as cleavage. So you have to understand this. What are the peculiarities of the cell division during the cleavage? What are the planes and patterns of cleavage? As you already know, that this is something which is very important in studying the invertebrates and vertebrates as well. So whether it is a radial cleavage pattern, biradial, spiral cleavage, that is something you should be covering here. And then whether it is a determinate cleavage or indeterminate, all the individual blastomeres have their fate already decided, while in indeterminate cleavage, it is only with the deposition of certain morphogens, and once the process of gastrulation begins and the three germ layers form, only then the fate will be decided, not at the level of blastula. So this is also something you can cover here. Then presence of yolk also influences the nature of cleavage, and that is why you should be studying how cleavage is different in frog and in chick, because there are two different eggs. The chick egg has a lot of amount of yolk, so it is a mega lethal egg. So here the egg cleavage that happens is only superficial, only on one part of the egg, and the rest of the egg is filled with yolk. So you should be focusing on how things are different between frog and chick, the blastulation. So whether the cleavage is holoblastic or meroblastic or superficial will be covered in this section. And with that, your blastula will be formed, and once blastulation is complete, it will then lead to gastrulation, and gastrulation, the three germ layers will be formed, and that will link us to the topic fate maps. And gastrulation also will link to the morphogenesis, and it will link to the topic axis formation. So all these three topics are connected to gastrulation, where you also should focus the gastrulation in frog mainly, and some part of the gastrulation of chick also, up to the level of formation of three germ layers. And here the gastrulation movements will also be important. So involution, epiboly, and invagination mainly you should focus on, and how the blastopore formation takes place, and how with that the primitive gut or archenteron forms. So with this you will be able to understand the process of three germ layers formation, as well as the coelom also a little better, with the understanding of this part of the developmental biology. With respect to chick's gastrulation, you have to understand that this is occurring in chick. The gastrulation is occurring only in the blastodisc area, and how that blastodisc area gets differentiated into two regions, that is the area pellucida and the area opaca. The area pellucida of chick has two layers. There is the epiblast and there is the hypoblast layer. And the epiblast has a mixed blastomere, so it has ectoderm, mesoderm and endoderm, while the hypoblast only has presumptive endoderm cells. So the process of gastrulation in chick and the embryo formation is confined to the area pellucida region, and that is what is also called as the embryonal area, and it is closely related to the formation of primitive streak, whose long axis establishes the anterior posterior axis of the embryo, and thus here under gastrulation you will be able to understand the axis formation with the formation of primitive streak, for example in chick. Also, you should be comparing how the movements during gastrulation are different from in the frog and in the chick embryo. And an additional delamination also occurs in chick embryo, which you will not see in the frog gastrulation. Then coming to morphogenesis. Morphogenesis is actually a creation of an order in the developing organism. So all the differentiated cells, they get organized into tissues, into organs, and then organ system, and then eventually make up the organism. So morphogen is the substance whose non-uniform distribution will govern this pattern formation in the developing cell. And to describe the morphogenesis process, the French flag model is very important, and you'll be able to understand this very well, and that you can use as an example to write the answer for morphogenesis. So in this section, direct questions are asked: what is morphogen? Describe morphogenesis with respect to frog or chick. So you can easily answer that, and thus you should prepare the French flag model of morphogenesis. And then with respect to frog, you need to really focus on the Spearman Mangold organizer and the gradient theory given by Charles Manning. So gradient theory. Then the Wnt signaling pathway, it plays a very important role in the morphogenesis and in the dorsoventral axis formation in frogs, so that is also important. And with respect to chick, the posterior margin zone of chick epiblast cells, they initiate the primitive streak formation, and what are the different genes which are involved in it, that is also something you should be focusing with respect to morphogenesis in chick. Then coming to the fate maps, so as a result of gastrulation, the three germ layers, the primary germ layers or the embryonic layers, endoderm, ectoderm and mesoderm, they are established, and all the organs of the embryo are then formed from these three layers. So the development of various organs is something called as organogenesis. So before that happens, what is the fate of all these three layers has been decided, and that is something you study under fate maps. So what happens to once the gastrula has been formed? So this gastrula has the ectoderm and it has the endoderm separated by a mesoderm. So ectoderm will lead to the formation of central nervous system, epidermis and the sense organs and the receptors, while mesoderm will lead to formation of the notochord and the vertebral column. Eventually then somites, which will give rise to the muscles, it will give rise to the reproductive system, the excretory system, and it will also form the mesenchyme, which gives rise to part of the skeleton, part part of the respiratory system, the dermis, the circulatory system, mesenteries, connective tissue, and the peritoneal layer also. And then there is endoderm, and this endoderm is actually forming the lining of respiratory system. So this is also part of the respiratory system, lining of the urinary bladder and the lining of the digestive tract, the inner ear, the middle ear and its lining, some of the organs such as thymus, such as thyroid, that is all developed from endoderm. So you have to do that. And with respect to that, the gastrula of frog, showing all these fate of these different cell layers, is also very important with respect to fate maps. Now coming to the next topic, that is blastogenesis. So unlike sexually reproducing organisms where the reproductive unit is a single cell, for example zygote, which is the fertilized ovum, in case of asexually reproducing organism, this reproductive unit is not a cell but a multicellular fragment or bud, and it is a heterogeneous and complex formation of cells, and this is derived from one parent, and then development of this bud is something we call as blastogenesis. So in this development of this unit in asexual reproduction is actually an aspect of regeneration which has puzzled the scientists for a very long time. And blastogenesis in fact has these two aspects. One is with respect to enlargement, and one is with respect to dissemination and propagation. So in the blastogenic organisms, such as for example is sponges, and even coelentrates, the growth does not stop. However, when the specific structure being formed is completed, it continues in an area which is known as the blastogenic zone. So these zones are there, and the growth continues in these zones. And so blastogenesis you should study with respect to budding in hydra, and also because it is an aspect of regeneration, it should be studied with the amphibian limb regeneration, where there is a mass of undifferentiated cells called as blastema under the apical cap whenever the amputation of the limb happens. And Wnt signaling pathway is important there also. And in this blastogenesis or the regeneration, the skeletal muscle fibers in the stump, they dedifferentiate and return to a proliferating state and form the blastema. There your focus should be on how the proximo-distal axis is established during the stump tissue growth. So basically you have to study with respect to hydra's budding, and then a small aspect is the regeneration in the amphibian limb. Now coming to the next topic, that is genes in development of chick and man. Now this topic with respect to the questions asked in previous years is not important, but again it is given in the syllabus, so you should be able to write a short note on this also. So genes in chick development first. So all the developmental genes, they are divided into two categories. They are the regulatory genes and they are the effector genes. So regulatory genes are the ones which encode for transcription factors and components of the signal transduction system, while the effector genes are the ones which encode enzymes and structural proteins. So with respect to chick, there can be certain examples you can write a note on. VG1, and there is Wnt8C, which is in both of them are involved in initiating the gastrulation. Then there is the BMP, bone morphogenic protein gene product. It's a signaling factor and it induces the ventral development in chick. Then the cells of Henson's node, they secrete a different caudin, noggin and nodal proteins, so their genes. These antagonize BMPs and then they dorsalize the ectoderm and mesoderm. So this dorsoventral axis patterning happens because of these two. Then there is the Tinman gene, which is necessary during the development of heart in chick, and the separation of single eye field into two bilateral field This depends upon the secretion of sonic hedgehog protein. So that is the gene involved here, sonic hedgehog. And the distinction between the right and left sides of chick is regulated by two major proteins, the paracrine signaling factor nodal, and there is a transcription factor PITX2. So their genes are then the important development genes in chick. Now similar genes are there in man also. In fact, sonic hedgehog is very important and plays a role in humans in patterning of the neural tube and limb development. And if there is any misregulation that happens, it can cause something called as holoprosencephaly. The failure of cleavage happens, and then there is failure of rotation. So the prosencephalon, it fails to develop into two hemispheres. So all these genes with respect to chick and man, what are the roles in the development they play, you can do that. So now coming to the homeotic genes. So the genes responsible for segment identity and specification or identity of the anterior posterior axis are called as the homeotic selector genes. And most of the study of the homeotic genes started with the genes in Drosophila, but then later these homologs were found in higher animals as well. And evidence of existence of these genes specifying the segment identity, they came from some unusual striking mutations in Drosophila. So actually the homeotic genes term comes from the term homeosis, which actually means the transformation of a whole segment or a structure into another related one. So certain genes in Drosophila were identified, and these genes in the mutations in certain genes which caused the certain phenotypic changes, these genes then were called as the homeotic genes. For example, there are two homeotic gene clusters which are very famous in the Drosophila. One is the bithorax complex, and the other is Entenapedia complex. So bithorax complex was identified in a fly which was having a mutation in this gene, and then that gave rise to wings in place of the halteres. So Drosophila is a fruit fly. It is a dipteran insect, so they have only one pair of wings. The second pair is modified into a balancing organ structures called as halteres. So when there was a mutation in bithorax complex, that led to the formation of two pair of wings instead of one. So the other was Entenapedia. So in Entenapedia mutation, the antenna were transformed into legs. So with that, we know that the homeotic genes play a very key role in identity specification of the segments. And in the bithorax complex, there are three genes. There is the ultra bithorax, there is the abdominal A, and then there is abdominal B. While in Entenapedia, there are different genes. There is lab for labial, there is PB for proboscipedia, there is DFD for deformed, there is SCR for the sex chromes reduced, there is ANTP, which is the Entenapedia. So all these are the homeotic genes. Now coming to the next topic, that is development of the eye and heart in the vertebrate. So eye in vertebrates develops from ectoderm. It develops from ectoderm, neural crest cells, and mesenchyme. And how it starts is that there are two small grooves which are formed on the side of the forebrain. That is, these are called as the optic grooves or the sulci. Optic sulci, singular is sulcus, plural is sulci. and then eventually they grow into optic vesicles, and the optic vesicles then grow into optic cups. The connection of the optic vesicles with the forebrain eventually becomes attenuated, and that is something called as the optic stalks, and optic stalks are something which will give rise to the optic nerves. Then the portion of the optic vesicle that interacts with the surface ectoderm, it induces the ectoderm to thicken into something called as the lens placode, and this lens placode is the precursor of lens, and it will eventually invaginate to become the lens pit and then lens vesicle. So it will also be lens pit and then eventually it will be lens vesicle. So simultaneously optic vesicle has also formed. Then further there will be development of retina, and then lens will further develop, choroid, sclera, cornea, and will develop, iris develop, ciliary body forms, and all. Likewise the development of eye will be complete. Now when it comes to heart develops from the mesoderm, and the mesoderm area specifically from where the heart develops is called as the cardiogenic area. Induction plays an important role here also, because there will be the underlying endoderm which will be inducing this cardiogenic area to start developing, and it will then develop two strands called as the cardiogenic strands. These cardiogenic strands cords, they keep on developing, and then they eventually form the endocardial cords or tubes. You call them as endocardial tubes because they have a lumen which is rapidly developing inside them. So eventually these two tubes will migrate and then together, and then they will eventually fuse to form the primitive heart tube. And this primitive heart tube then is distinguished into 5 different regions, which are the truncus arteriosus, there is the bulbus cordis, there is the ventricle, primitive ventricle, atrium, and then sinus venosus. And initially all the venous blood flows into the sinus venosus, and then it is propelled further. Then eventually after these 5 regions they will be modifying. The truncus arteriosus will eventually divide and give rise to the ascending aorta and pulmonary trunk. The cordis will develop into the right ventricle, and the primitive ventricle will form the left ventricle, and the atrium will become the anterior portion of both the right as well as the left atrium. The sinus venosus, on the other hand, develops into the posterior region of the right atrium, the SA node, and the coronary sinus. So that is how the development of heart will take place. Under the placenta in mammals, you should be focusing on the layers, the histology. So placenta has the embryonic layers, and it has the maternal layers. There are 3 layers in the embryonic layer. There is the fetal capillaries, fetal connective tissue, and fetal chorionic epithelium, and likewise 3 maternal layers: the uterine epithelium, uterine connective tissue, and the maternal capillaries. So then comes the classification of the placenta. So under classification you should be doing based on the implantation, then based on the degree of association, then based on the distribution of villi, and then based on the histology, which will include all the presence and absence of all these different embryonic as well as maternal layers, with the physiology of placenta and the functions of the placenta, and example of all these different types and with respect to different mammals you have to do. Now coming to cell lineage and the cell-cell interaction. Here under cell lineage you should be focusing on the methods of study of cell lineage. which are the different types of stains that can be used, and under that the Nile blue sulfate and neutral red were very important in the embryological studies initially. So there can be a direct study where you can use the Nomarsky differential interference contrast microscopy, and there can be clonal studies also where dyes can be used, such as fluorescein, conjugated dextrin. All these dyes are used. So methods of study is one. And what is the utilization of cell lineage studies? It is to understand the process of determination, and the Whitman's description of lineage patterns in leech embryos is something which was pioneer studies in the cell lineage. And then there was the C. elegans cell lineage patterns. So in C. elegans, it is uniquely suited for the analysis of cell lineage studies because it has small number of somatic cells whose position and morphology are almost invariant from animal to animal. So in fact you should study Caenorhabditis elegans as an example. It's cell lineage you should be focusing as an example. Then coming to cell interaction, under that you should be starting with the cell adhesion molecules, the cadherins and different families of the classical cadherins. Then the induction based cell adhesion, and that is very important because for with respect to the development of eye and ear, because induction is the process in development in which one cell, or there may be a group of cells, they go through specific developmental process, but that happens under the influence of another cell or another groups of cells, and that is something which happens during the lens placode formation and even in the heart. So that is what you should be covering under cell lineage and cell interaction. Now under teratogenesis, the genetic and induced teratogenesis are the two sections. So teratogenesis is nothing but abnormalities which are caused by certain exogenous factors or certain genetic abnormalities. So if it is due to genetic abnormalities, it is genetic teratogenesis. But if there is certain exogenous agents such as certain chemicals, viruses, radiation, even hyperthermia, then that can lead to induced teratogenesis. And teratogen in that case becomes an agent that can cause permanent damage in the structure and function of the organism if that organism is exposed to that agent during the embryogenic development. And the concept of induced teratogenesis, it came into picture with the discovery of the congenital rubella syndrome by Norman McAllister Gregg. So there may be different teratogenic agents. There can be infectious agents, there can be physical agents such as radiation and hyperthermia, there can be certain drugs and chemical agents, there can be certain nutritional deficiencies, certain metabolic imbalances in the mother, and these can be the teratogenic agents which cause induced teratogenesis. So under infectious agents you have variety: rubella virus, cytomegalovirus, HIV, toxoplasma gondii, there is varicella virus. In physical agents there are the ionizing radiation such as the X-rays, gamma rays. And in drugs category is very important, and because a direct question on that was asked related to the thalidomide baby. So drugs such as alcohol, cocaine, thalidomide, Agent Orange, vitamin A derivatives which are called as retinoids, all of them are responsible for induced teratogenesis. And with respect to thalidomide, because direct question has been asked, so it is very important. It is linked to syndrome, thalidomide baby, which is called as. So in 1961, Lenz was the person who linked this compound thalidomide to limb defects, and thalidomide was actually given as an over-the-counter drug which was sold in 1960s in Europe as to women, pregnant women, to control nausea. But that then was later found to cause limb defects in the babies, and so you have to prepare a separate note, and with that you can add Agent Orange and other such drugs also. On the other hand, when you look at the genetic teratogenesis, there can be malformations like the PAX6 gene malformation, which is responsible for aniridia and Peters anomaly. So it's a key regulatory gene which is in the eye and brain development. So if there is any malformation, it will lead to the aniridia or Peters anomaly. And then there are different autosomal dominant malformations, so achondroplasia, Marfan syndrome. Autosomal recessive can be there can be spinal muscular dystrophy as an example here. Then there can be X-linked and various aneuploidies also under the genetic teratogenesis. Now, coming to the topic, the role of thyroxine in control of metamorphosis in amphibia. In amphibians, the metamorphosis, there is an intermediate larva, tadpole larva, and generally the metamorphosis occurs when the pond water dries up. So the eggs are released in a pond. During the rainy season, the reproductive activity is very high, so during that or post rainy season where there are a lot of pond water bodies formed, so the eggs will be released there, and from the eggs the tadpole will emerge. But when the season changes, so there is change in temperature, change in the light, change in nutrition availability because of the drying up of pond, that induces the hypothalamus to release TRH, the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the pituitary, and then pituitary will be releasing the TSH, that is the thyroid stimulating hormone, and this acts on thyroid, and then thyroid gland is able to form tri and tetraiodothyronin, and T3 is more potent than T4 because the cells are more receptive to it, and then that causes the metamorphosis of tadpole into adult. Then how this thyroxine acts on the tadpole, and what are the progressive and regressive changes it undergoes eventually to metamorphosize into adult, and the role of prolactin as an inhibitor of metamorphosis is something also you should be dealing here. And with that, we'll come to the next topic, that is the pedogenesis and neoteny. So actually, neoteny is nothing but retention of the juvenile characters, and this concept was first given by Walter Garstang in 1922. And this neoteny, which is when the juvenile form retains these characters into adulthood, it manifests itself into two ways. One is the pedogenesis, and the other is pedomorphosis. Pedogenesis is the acceleration of sexual maturation relative to the body development. So if the sexual maturation usually takes 2 years, so it will be the animal will be sexually mature within a few months, so that will be something called as pedogenesis. On the other hand, pedomorphosis would be that the development of the body is there is a slowly retarding, in fact slow body development, and the reproductive activity will be the same. So when it is supposed to, in whatever time set it is supposed to start reproducing, it will do that, but the body development will be slowed down. So even if it is reproductively active, it will still have the tadpole like features, so the larval characters or the juvenile character. That is something called as pedomorphosis. So pedogenesis is something which is seen in fact in humans, where the female, they become reproductively mature earlier as compared to the males. And in case of these neoteny, they can be seen not only in amphibia but in birds, flightless birds, and humans as well. And a question related to how a neoteny played a role in human evolution has been asked in the evolutionary section. So with respect to neoteny, further you should be focusing on the neoteny in amphibians, which involves the obligate neoteny, where all the members of the Amphiumidae family and Sirenidae family, they are all obligate neotenes, means that they never fully metamorphosize, and they always retain their larval characters in varying degrees into adulthood. And these amphibians, they are even insensitive to thyroid hormones. Even if you inject them with thyroid hormone, they will not undergo metamorphosis. There's something called as inducible obligate neoteny, and that is something which is seen in Ambystoma mexicanum. What happens is that in them, if you inject thyroid hormone, they will undergo metamorphosis. So it can be, the metamorphosis can be induced. So this is inducible obligate neoteny. And then the third one is the facultative neoteny, which is seen in certain salamanders and Ambystoma species. This occurs in individuals or sometimes entire populations due to certain environmental factors. For example, if it's really cold, then the environment is inhospitable to live, and in that case, rather than becoming the adult, the tadpole retains the larval characteristics and then becomes reproductively active. So something which you see in axolotl larvae of the Ambystoma and salamanders. And they can at times be injected with iodine, or they can be injected with thyroid hormone, and that will lead to their metamorphosis. Now coming to cell death and aging. So as the animal is reproducing and as it is growing, the other aspect of developmental biology is that every animal will eventually age, and the cells age, and eventually they undergo cell death. And something cell death can be necrotic, or it can be through apoptosis. Apoptosis is a programmed cell death, where you have both external, extrinsic, and intrinsic ways through which the cell itself knows that it has to undergo apoptosis, or there can be certain extrinsic pathways which lead into eventually the cell undergoing apoptosis. So necrosis and apoptosis, the difference, and then the extrinsic and intrinsic pathways of apoptosis you should be knowing. And then the concept of aging, you can relate the cell death with aging, or the cellular senescence, where the cell has ceased dividing, to eventually the animal eventually aging. And in that, the oxidative stress plays an important role, and also the mitochondrial theory of aging has been asked in exams. So this is important. Another thing important here is that DNA repair and synthesis is important in preventing senescence in individuals in different species. And so genes encoding these DNA repair proteins is something important. And with respect to that, certain diseases such as the Hutchinson's Gilford progeria is something you can also include here. Then the insulin signaling cascade and its role in aging, as well as the extrinsic factors and the epigenetic reasons for aging, is also important. In vitro fertilization, so it is the fertilization in a petri dish where, due to certain male and female infertility reasons, if they are not able to conceive, then in that case, eggs may be retrieved from the woman and the sperms from the man, and then fertilization of the egg occurs in vitro in the lab, and then embryo can be transferred back to the uterus of the female. There are different steps in it. First steps is the egg retrieval. So before the egg is retrieved from the female, there are fertility drugs given to her. So follicle stimulating hormone is given, and then after some time the ultrasound will be done to see how many of the eggs are are good enough to be the follicular aspiration to be done. So a very thin needle is then inserted through the vagina, then up to the ovary, and then this needle through suction picks up these eggs which are mature. And once the eggs are retrieved, they are set into incubator for some time, for example 4 hours, and then the sperm is collected, the semen is collected from the male, and then sperms are taken out from that semen. So the eggs that have been collected, and they are placed together with the sperm of the male in the environmentally controlled chamber, and this leads to the this is what is the in vitro fertilization. Sometimes the sperm is directly injected in the egg also, and that is something which we call as ICSI, that is the intracytoplasmic sperm injection. And then after some time, the fertilization, if it has happened or not, it is recorded. So it is done after 1 day of the egg retrieval. Then the fertilization, it should happen within 1 day, and then once it has happened, once it started dividing, full expansion of blastocyst occurs, and embryo then is ready to leave its shell, which is the zona pellucida, and then it is to be transplanted into the endometrium. So that happens on the 6th or the 7th day. So this is the whole process of in vitro fertilization. What are the uses, what are the steps you should be covering here? Then cloning is the process which will produce genetically identical cells, tissues, genes, and organisms. And cloning is different types. There can be gene cloning, where copies of genes or segments of DNA are cloned. Then there is the reproductive cloning, where you clone and produce copies of whole animals. And then there can be therapeutic cloning also, where stem cells are used to create new tissues or replace injured or diseased tissues. So in the whole animal or reproductive cloning, the technique that is used is SCNT, that is somatic cell nuclear transfer. What created Dolly the sheep, that was the first mammal whole reproductive clone which was made. And in that case, what is done is there is an unfertilized egg cell taken. So this is the egg cell, and its nucleus is removed, and then another somatic cell is taken, and its nucleus is then transplanted into this egg cell. So this is the somatic cell, and its nucleus is then transplanted here. So that will create this cell which has a nucleus of a somatic cell. And then this is transplanted, implantation is done in the uterus of a surrogate, and that develops into eventually a clone. So the technique and the ethical implications of it is something you should be studying here under cloning. Then coming to now the stem cells. So any cell, in order to be considered a stem cell, needs to have two requirements. One should be that it needs to have the ability of a self renewal, and it should have and its potency, where stem cells have the ability to differentiate into specialized cell types. So they must be able to go through multiple cell division, that is cell renewal, and then they should differentiate into specialized cell types, and these two requirements must be met for a cell to be called as stem cell. So there are different categories: the embryonic, fetal, adult, amniotic, induced pluripotent. All these are the different categories of stem cells. And then further there are the totipotent, there is the pluripotent, there is multipotent, all these stem cells. So what are the examples of it? You should be knowing that. And from where these stem cells are, where the sources of these stem cells, and how these stem cells can be used in human welfare. And in that case, induced pluripotent stem cells and the technique is very important, because that is what helps us in the human welfare. And the embryonic stem cell therapy, its advantages, and how they are more beneficial with respect as compared to the adult stem cells for the therapeutic purposes. Now coming to the last topic, that is biogenetic law. So this law is the theory of development and evolution that was proposed by Ernst Haeckel in 1860s. It is one of the several recapitulation theories that were given, and commonly actually it states that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So the biogenetic law theorizes that stages an animal embryo undergoes during development are chronological replay of that species' past evolutionary forms. So the Haeckel's concept of biogenetic law, he gave three assumptions for that, and the one was the law of correspondence. The second was that phylogenesis in an animal, it must occur by addition of new characters to the end of the normal developmental process. And the third principle was the principle of truncation. So actually what Haeckel believed was that an animal, for example a mammal, it undergoes in its embryogenic life, it shows the characters of its evolutionary history. So it will appear like a fish at some point, as a frog at another point, and then as a reptile, and then bird, and then eventually human, or any mammal. So this is how he had interpreted the biogenetic law. But it was actually a misinterpretation, because a mammalian embryo will, or a reptile, or all the vertebrate embryos, they appear similar in the starting, but slowly they start diversifying. And that is where the von Baer's law come into picture, because von Baer had set certain points that the general features of large group of animals, they appear earlier in the development, and then the specialized feature they appear later. And the embryo of a given species, instead of passing through the adult stages of lower animals, departs more and more away from that. So with respect to the Haeckel, you need to also do the von Baer's law to eventually understand what actually ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny mean. So that was the overall analysis of the syllabus of DevBio. Under books, I would recommend that you should keep any Indian author book as your main book for the this section. And one such example I can give is Veer Bala Rastogi's Chordate Embryology, Developmental Biology. Most of the topics are covered in the book. For certain topics, you need to use the help of the internet. And then there is the foreign author book, the Gilbert's Developmental Biology. 9th edition and above is something which you can use for the value addition, apart from their basic Indian author book which you can use. So that is all. Thank you for listening.